Live streaming is on.
Okay, welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, J.R. Stewart, and here's my other partner in crime.
Hey, how you doing, folks? Tommy Duncan.
And today we're going to somewhat finish our conversation from last week. Um, I'm going to do my best to refrain from identifying our enemy as the WLSPD because that makes people uncomfortable. So we will try to have this conversation, but I think those of you who follow me know who I'm talking about when I say our enemy. Um, so last week I believe Tom, I you mentioned the 40 acres in the Mule and what happened to it, and I thought that would be a good topic to discuss. What happened to our 40 acres in the Mule? So let's kick it in and get started. So after the Civil War, into slavery, during Reconstruction period, thousands of black people were given land grants. Um, in fact, the plantation slave owners' lands were the first to be confiscated. Then there were other federal lands that were set aside. And then, of course, if you didn't mind making the trek out west, the government had land tracts out there that they were repopulating free slaves on. So, what happened to all that land? What let's talk about it. So, go ahead.
Well, obviously, there was an effort to enfranchise the newly freed um, Africans who had been enslaved for a couple of hundred years in America by distributing some of the land that was taken from the southern plantation owners in the southeast, different parts of the country, Georgia, South Carolina, and some other areas. Uh, I wouldn't say it would be similar to the land grab that we had in Oklahoma, but obviously a redistribution of land, which at that point in time was wealth in America, which was primarily an agriculture or an agrarian driven country. And after the change of the guard, you have Andrew Jackson coming in, and during his administration, uh, you had folks in the South who didn't feel that these newly freed folks deserved or needed land, or basically they wanted their land back after they had exploited them for a couple hundred years in order to build an economy and gain wealth. After the South was defeated, and some of this land, and we're not talking about a significant part, but some of this land was redistributed to the newly freed Americans because they were American citizens. Uh, Obviously, there was some politics, and that land was in essence taken back from a lot of those folks who had been working that land for a period of time. So obviously, this couldn't have been done without some support from the government and the military. And there we go. That's the cliff notes of it. I don't want to get into a great deal of historical detail because I know we have some time limitations on what we have. But at the end of the day, land and at least the potential for wealth was redistributed to a lot of blacks in America, and then a significant part of it was taken away. And obviously, in my opinion, there's no way that this can happen without collusion from both sides or an agreement from both sides, since there was a
See,
support.
Tom, I disagree with you there. So,
We can agree to disagree, but
here's the deal.
when you start talking about military and arms, there has to be an agreement on both sides.
Here's the deal. There doesn't have to be an agreement on both sides. It just has to be an agreement by the group that's in power to do something. And it's amazing to me that we continue to give coverage to those who wrong us. So this just wasn't a land redistribution plan because some of those people actually bought the land. The Freedmen Bureau actually sold a lot of those people the land. So what did it was just given to them for free. One, like you said, a lot of them had worked that land for generations for little or no pay whatsoever, other than some food scraps that fell off the master's table. The other piece is that some of them were hired out and had other jobs outside of their 16-hour job on the plantation every day, where they could earn a few pennies to possibly buy their freedom or buy the freedom of others if they could save up enough pennies over 30 or 40 years. So some of those people, free Americans, actually bought the land that they were on. So when
Jimmy,
you say that the land was taken from them, it wasn't just that this was, oh, here's a plot of land over here, and now we want it back. This land represented all the wealth that black people had at the time, and those who had a few pennies in their pocket and were fortunate enough to be able to buy the land that they were on, I was suddenly found with a change of administration after a few years and a change of administration, a change in the power structure in the South to have their land taken from them. And this wasn't in cahoots with any Republicans that went along with this. The truth is Republicans couldn't stop it. There was no let's make a deal, man. I'll let y'all wrong these black folks in exchange for what? What would Republicans get out of this? We already know what the Southern Democrats got of it. They were able to return land back to the slave masters, the slave owners, who then, after they got their land back, they imposed a work system that required you to have work permits to even be on the streets. Many black people were picked up and arrested off the streets simply because they didn't have a work permit. And once you're thrown in jail and your slave master sees your name in the newspaper, comes down there and pays to get you out, now you're forever indebted to the slave master and you have to work the debt off, else be thrown in jail forever. You're right back into the slavery system. Republicans had nothing to do with that scheme. So what would Republicans get out of it if both agreed to do this, by your account?
well, Jimmy, okay, if we look at post Reconstruction, and obviously we're talking about not too far after the Civil War, and we look at the South, obviously, which had been decimated, after the Civil War, and we look at those who were newly freed citizens of America. Now, there may have been a few cases where folks could have actually bought the land, but let's be quite clear. Folks who have been enslaved for a couple of hundred years don't all of a sudden come out with a ton of capital to buy a ton of land. And so it's not all of a sudden they get out of being disenfranchised for a couple hundred years, and then all of a sudden they have a ton of cash to go in and buy a couple of land. And so clearly the government had some responsibility in terms of saying, you know what, this is obviously not going to recompensate for several generations of slavery and disenfranchisement, on American soil, but this is something that will at least help reappropriate what has been lost over a period of time. And when I'm not speaking Republican Democrat here, then obviously we can take sides on this, but we're talking about the North and the South. And so if we talk about the North and the South in terms of the power that the North had with the federal government after the Civil War and the South that had been decimated, and when we start talking about a collusion, when you have troops that truly couldn't stay in the South for the next 100 years, I get that. But at the end of the day, there ultimately is going to be some culpability if you have newly enfranchised folks who have been enslaved for a couple of hundred years, Jimmy, and provide some sense of a future in terms of land, which was the primary means of wealth. And either one, if you see that the folks who you've given the land to is being disenfranchised from the folks that you just freed them from, there's some responsibility there. So without there being some degree of collusion, Jimmy, it's just like when we go to war now, even though we're not comparing apples to oranges, you have to have some type of exit strategy. You stay in a country, in this case, in a part of the South for a period of time until you have economies that are being rebuilt. And obviously this is a long-term project per se, but at the end of the day, there is no way that you can have an entire group of people who are all of a sudden going to understand how to build economies, how to build wealth, how to build industry without some support just like after World War II, after we bombed, certain countries on the other side of the world, the U.S. put a ton of capital into help rebuilding other countries. But to this date, relative, when you consider what has been taken away from those who have helped build this country to become the most powerful country in the world, there has never been a significant enough amount of resource put into either one, recompensating folks for how they were exploited, or two, helping them to rebuild their economies.
Let me ask you this, Tom. What universities, black universities, were founded, funded, and started by white Democrats?
That's not the point we're talking about here, Jimmy.
Okay.
This has nothing to do with Democrat. We're making a political argument.
Time out.
We're making a political argument.
It is. I'm getting to a point. So you've gotten away from wanting to blame that skanky party for everything they've done. They're making a North-South regional thing. So I'm going to bring it back home for you. Where are the universities? What universities did Democrats who were wealthy at the time, who still had some money, where was their money? What school did they put their money into for blacks?
Jimmy, we're not talking about the United States of Democrats.
Okay, so the answer is none.
Jimmy,
no,
you're starting to initiate a political argument, Jimmy. This is the United States of Jimmy. Let me finish one statement. I want to rebuild the foundation here, because this is not the United States of Democrat or United States of Republican Party.
At that time it was, Tom. At that time it was. So you're trying to overlay the environment today with what was going on back then. You can't do that. You have to go back to that era and the way people were thinking at that time. We didn't have a standing professional army. We already discussed that. You're already given that skanky party coverage by making it a North-South thing instead of a Republican-Democrat, which I don't know what the difference is, because Republicans were the northern stronghold and the South was the stronghold. So let's look at the institutions other than military that were in place at that point. So the Democrats did nothing to help educate black folks. They did just the opposite.
Well, why would they, Jimmy? I mean, they why would Why would they?
They did everything possible because you talked about the need to educate people and to help them become functional in society. So what worked against that? This is what I'm trying to point out now, is that the black schools were intimidated and a lot of times burned down to the ground. And the only teacher that they could get to teaching these were white Quakers who came from the North. The South did nothing to educate black people.
Of course they would. Of course they would.
The South did nothing. If you want to call them the South and don't want to call them Democrats, we're fine. We'll just call them the South then. The South did nothing to build universities to help educate black people.
Of course
so
they would.
Assimilate into society.
You're right. You're exactly right. They had no reason to. They wouldn't.
And the only reason we got any cooperation out of the quote unquote South was because there was an army there and people there with guns that were willing to shoot them if they act up. But there was only so much, because unlike a very powerful federal government that we have today that has intruded in every aspect of our life, back then there was strict adherence to the Constitution. And at that time, there was a division between the federal government and the states. As soon as the states pledged to follow the laws of the Constitution, they were reinstated, and then local control was given back to the states at that point as they went through the reinsertion process. And at that point, everything that the federal government didn't have control over, that meant the state and local government had control over. If it was not enumerated in the Constitution as part of the Constitution or one of the amendments, then as far as people concerned, that right was reserved to the state governments at that point. And at that point, there was nothing the federal government could do. So some of these matters, like for instance, picking a person up and arresting them for not having a work permit when they're just simply trying to walk back to their home, There was nothing the federal government could do about that. Why? Because the Constitution did not talk about it, enumerate any power to give the federal government control over work permits. That was a state and a city and a county activity. So your point here, you're putting today's sensitivities where the federal government can step in and do whatever the hell they want to. They can stomp on cities, counties, and states if they want to because they're just that powerful. Back then, we didn't have a powerful federal government. And once the standing army could not be maintained in the South because these people had to go home, get back to their lives, they didn't want to be down there babysitting. They had jobs and families to go back to also. So there was no way that Republicans, once Democrats regained control of government, once they were reinstated back into the Union, once they had senators and congressmen that could vote and help shape policy, and then especially once they took the White House with that alley cat Jackson. I mean, he did some good things, but in addition to all the harm they did to black,
he did some good things for who?
For white people, for white Democrats.
That's my point.
But he also rounded up. This is the same man who rounded up the Indians, marched their ass off to the desert land in order to take them off their lands in Florida and Mississippi and Alabama, marched them up to Oklahoma and Kansas and further out west to put them on Indian reservation. And even then stepped on them. So my point is that it's not just black people. This party that you want to protect and give cover to and hide by saying all people do it, all politicians do it, both parties do it, there had to be some collusion. All you really doing, Tom, is saying we don't want to identify this one skanky party for taking away land from black people. All the little possession they had at the time was that land. Taking away land from Indians, so it wasn't just black people. He also did.
I agree with that. I'm very aware of the almost complete genocide of the true indigenous people who are in what we call the United States of America. That wasn't the topic of this discussion. So the reality of it is,
acres, but you brought up other mitigating circumstances, like there had to be some kind of collusion because one party couldn't do it by themselves.
Okay, so Jimmy, do you want me to say ultimately that the Republican Party is responsible for everything that has ever happened to black folks in America that's good, and Democrat is responsible for everything that has happened to black folks in America that's bad? Is that what you're asking for?
No, that's not what I'm asking. What I'm saying is, let's be honest about it. Now, I'll be the first to admit that Republicans have been jellyfish, spineless, cowardly when it came to counteracting things that Democrats have done. Now, I'll be the first to admit that. And a lot of that is because of the media and because of how things are reported. If a white Republican were to say, Bill O'Reilly, who ran a study from the Heritage Foundation that said if a young girl were to graduate high school, wait until she was married to have babies, and get a job, that she was almost 98% guaranteed to be comfortable middle class. And when he read that report, all the people that jumped on him, that I dare a white person who never been in the black neighborhood, don't know black folks, to be commenting on the black condition. Well, what's wrong with the advice? That's the point. It doesn't matter who it came from, but when other white people who are spineless see this, who do not have the courage, who are not going to put themselves out there for any cause dealing with black people because they already know how they're going to be vilified and excoriated by the press and other so-called fake black leaders, their fake outrage, the idea, but who are not doing anything themselves. So when you look at the totality of it, I'm not saying that white Republicans or Republicans are all that great. I'm saying that Republicans, white and some blacks, have turned their backs on black people because there was no political capital to fight the cause anymore. But that does not excuse white liberal, socialist, progressive Democrats that at every turn in history have worked against black people.
But Jimmy, that was never my argument in the first place. Jimmy, that is not my argument at all. I am not excusing anyone. And the reality of it is where you and I differ a little bit is that you look at it on left and right, Republican and Democrat. I am looking at it from a much broader perspective because at the end of the day, I see it as two sides of the same coin. I'm not saying that there's all bad in one side and all good on the other side, but I'm looking at it on two sides of the same coin, number one. And number two, I'm also looking at it not just from their responsibility, because ultimately, if we're depending on somebody else's responsibility to get anything done for us, we might as well forget it.
Who on this topic here then? You brought it up last week, the 40 acres and a mule. Okay, narrow it back down to this. Who took the land? Which party took the land for black people? So forget white, black, red, brown, forget Republican, Democrat, North, South.
But
the
Jimmy,
40 acres,
ultimately, Jimmy, the United States wasn't even a central government. What are you talking about? When you talking about who took the land? We were a confederation of states at that time. We're talking about, if we're talking about backdating, Jimmy, we were a confederation of states. We weren't even a central government if we're going back that far.
We had a central government. The country was being united.
We were talking about a loose confederation. Jimmy, if we're talking about going back to the foundation of this, we are talking about a very loose confederation of states.
We're talking about the 1800s when blacks had land that was given to them by the government.
We're not talking about the 1800s. We're talking about 200 years before that, Jimmy.
No, we're not talking about the 40 acres and a mule. Let's bring it back to what we started. This is what the show is about. 40 acres and a mule. Last week, you said, what happened to our 40 acres? Okay, I said that'd be a great topic. Let's talk about it this week. So now we're talking about it. Who took the 40 acres, Tom? We know who gave the 40 acres. Republicans did when they were in power. Who took the 40 acres? Why is that so hard?
Jimmy, the same folks who owned the land in the first place.
Tom, there is no who owned it in the first place. Because whoever owned it in the first place were the indigenous people. So why?
Jimmy,
so hard,
the indigenous people in America, Jimmy, the indigenous people in America who originally owned that land didn't have the land. The land was taken away from them, so they didn't own that land. The white folks owned that land, not the Indians.
It was taken away from black people.
That land, not Indians, Jimmy.
And we've already identified that not all of those people, thousands of people, Tom, do you know how many people we're talking about? We're not talking about just a few handful of people. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of people that had land that they thought they owned. They did own. They had a deed to it. They had legal ownership of the land. The government, run by who? Democrats, came along, took the land from them, not just solely out for public good. There was no public good in this. The public good was given to the people who had been in danger and harm, and was trying to make the government was trying to do something to do good by them. That would totally make up for slavery? No, but at least it was a start. People talk about now reparations. Well, okay, this was reparation at that time. Republicans gave the land to black people, and now we have to debate. I can't even get you to simply say Democrats took the land away from black people. I mean, this is how ingrained it is in our society to criticize that party for anything they've done. You rather say both parties.
Why do we continue to have a party conversation?
You don't give credit to both parties giving the land, but you give credit to both parties taking the land. When one party gave the land, one party took the land. It was no.
Why are we having a party conversation?
Huh?
Why are we having a party conversation?
Because you didn't want me to say white, liberal, socialist, progressive, Democrat.
Because we're taking that. I mean, if we're talking
about all the other pieces off of it, the top four layers off of it, to now just narrow it down to just Democrats now, since you don't want to say white, liberal.
Jimmy, I'm not having a political conversation, because if we want to talk about who took the land back, it was the slave owners who had the land. That's who took the land back. Call them Democrats,
no,
what you want to, but at the end of the day, they
who had the land could not take the land back. They had no. That's just like someone could walk up to you right now and say, "You know, I used to live here. I want my house back." A person just cannot come take land back. That is an untrue statement. The government.
Jimmy, you know what? If after the Civil War, the troops from the North who represented the Republican Party drove them off the land through whatever military and other means, and gave that land to the African slaves, some of which who had been working that land. And then when they left and went back home, those folks who were the plantation owners and the slave drivers went back with their guns or whatever means they had necessary. Then yes, they took the land that they had from the Africans.
That's not how it went down. That's not how it went down, Tom. You gotta go read the rest of the history, the legal fights that took place at that time, the court battles that took place. Guess what?
Legal fights?
Yes, legal fights in court over this. And I guarantee.
So what you're saying is,
not one white
to get the land that they were giving to black folks.
Lawyer fighting for the rights of the black people. I guarantee you, when they went into court, if these people had a lawyer, that this was a Republican lawyer, this was a lawyer from the North. It was not a Southern lawyer. It was not a Democrat lawyer. I guarantee you. So this took a little while to work its way through the courts, the challenges. And then in the end, the government, controlled by Democrats, confiscated the land, gave it back to whoever they thought were the original owners. And so at that point, that made it legal. So that's what happened to the 40 acres. I don't know why we continue to try to give coverage to our enemy. There is no way, Tom. There's no way we're ever going to overcome anything our enemy has done, because we can't even identify who our enemy is. And so when we make excuses for them, provide coverage, say that, this is a political issue and we don't want to talk about it because we need to talk about the economics. Politics and economics go hand in hand. If you don't have war, politics are not going to protect you. So politics.
What is your recommendation?
My recommendation, Tom, is that our people need to be educated on who their true enemy is. We've been made to believe that Republicans are our enemy, that they're the party of racism, they're the party of the Klan. In reality is the Democratic Party founded and funded the KKK, gave them carte blanche to kill and lynch thousands of black people, and how we can revise history simply by one party just saying that that's the party over there of the KKK, and these spineless ass, silly ass, cowardly white people saying, well, I'm not going to dignify that statement with a response. And you let the same statement be said over and over, and people believe it. Now it is entrenched in the minds of black people that somehow the Democratic and conservative Republicans are their enemy. When the reality is, historically, that doesn't bear out. Just because somebody Johnson was smart enough to figure out that used the racism claim against Goldwater during the presidential elections back then, and was surprised on how many black people then supported for the Church Party over the racism claim, and for him to now say, we'll have those niggas tied up for the next 200 years, he meant it. And that was true, because for the next couple of hundred years, black folks seem to be on track to support that party, a party that even when that's in control of the cities, won't clean up the trash in your neighborhood, have your neighborhood smelling like dead bodies and rats and rodents and everything else. I just saw a citizen to the leak on this. This kid has been going around. They started off in Baltimore. They just went to another city in LA, raising money from whom? Conservative Republicans to do what? Go to Baltimore and pick the damn trash up. Why in the world would anybody have to raise money to go do something that the city is paid to do? Except in the black areas, it looks like a damn disaster zone. Like you dropped a bomb down there, and no one, and the people who claim to be for the people, power for the people, we down with the people, will not go clean it up. So it doesn't surprise me, Tom, that historically that party has been stomping, wiping their feet, and shitting on black people for years. They have not stopped it. So until our people understand the role of government in politics and how you don't have to give your vote to these people just for them to shit on you, and you can stand up for yourself. You have an option to go vote for someone else, not vote. Go vote for the Green Party if you want to. But for every vote you get to a Democrat, you are voting for a party that is constantly shitting on you and your people. I mean,
okay, Jimmy. So with that being the case, Jimmy, and with Republicans who have done so much over the last 50 years
I didn't say they've done anything. I admit
enfranchise
that.
black people in
You
America.
keep putting the words into my mouth. I said
But
they
Jimmy,
have been
you're the one
following
that's
this
Jimmy,
fine with
let me
and
finish.
watching
Jimmy,
this happen.
let me
I
finish my
said
point.
that, Tom. So why you keep saying, "Oh, Republicans have done how much the Republicans haven't done anything"? They've stood by and watched it happen. So
So
I
what
said
is it?
that.
So if that is the case, what is it that is going to influence our community that votes probably 85 to 90% Democrat,
95%.
which I'm not advocating. I'm advocating something completely different. But if that is the case, and the recommendation is to balance your political affiliation, my recommendation is to vote your interests, regardless of the case. Then, even if hypothetically we say that the Democratic Party is your enemy, and we acknowledge that, and let's say they acknowledge that, what does that really bias?
What that bias, Tom, is that by not giving our vote away, right now you have Mayor de Blasio and the Democratic Party trying to get rid of charter schools. A lot of black kids go to charter schools because the public schools have failed them. The public black schools in the inner city are dumps. Half our boys don't even graduate high school. The kids who do graduate high school, the average black kid is 2 or 3 grade levels behind their white counterpart, who is 2 grade levels behind their Asian counterpart. I mean, Tom, so do you not understand that you're not going to fix the economic condition as long as people perceive that black people who are supposed to be professional and competent are not really that competent, because the only way they get into a school is through affirmative action. Only way they can get in to do anything or even get hired is putting pressure on people to put jobs aside for them as some set aside, as some repayment option. Things are not going to change economically for us until we are at the same level where Asian people are. They're considered to be smart people. Some of them are smart, some of them are dumb as rocks. But their people are considered smart. And on top of that, they're the highest earning income group in America. On
Absolutely.
average, they earn almost $80,000 a year per family.
Jimmy,
White
matter of
people
fact,
are
Jimmy,
around- what?
you're right. There was a recent survey that came out, Jimmy, and now the average Asian household in America from 2017 to 2018 has now gone up to $87,000, give or take, per year. The average black household in America is now at 41,000. Average Hispanic household at 51,000. Average white household is at $67,000. All that being said, is politics being in mind, we have to make some very difficult decisions and very disciplined decisions. But this is the rub, Jimmy. I'm not disagreeing with you in large part. The challenge is this: if 90%, give or take, of black people in America vote Democratic, not across the board, but generally speaking, Democratic, I guess if we consider a strategy of forcing down the black democratically overwhelming voting public, that Democrats have done everything to destroy them, at the end of the day, I'm not exactly sure what that buys us, as opposed to taking in a narrative of what the issues are and allowing folks who are intelligent to make their own decision as what's in the best interest of our community, whether that be Republican or Democrat. Because if 90 to 95% of them are voting Republican, just telling them that their party sucks is probably going to push them backwards or in the other direction more than it is going to force them to think about their current condition, who's responsible for that current condition, and what they need to do about it. That is my point.
Tom, there is no white Republican, there is no black Republican that's going to go into the black community and change their minds on which party to vote for. And as a result of that, they're going to continue to vote 95% for that one party that controls their schools, that controls their streets, that controls the economy of their neighborhoods, that make the rules for their city and their county. You talk of heavily black populated areas are heavily run by Democrats, and they're all run into the ground. That is not going to change. And as long as you believe that the person who's trying to bring you an alternative message is a racist, is part of the Klan, is responsible for slavery. You know, Elijah Cummings gave a speech where he said that Democratic Party was the party that freed the slaves. And I searched the landscape. I thought for certain that the news media, when somebody was going to catch that and correct it and say something about it, MSNBC, CNN, all the alphabet news outlets, and even the morning news, which got a copy of, had no reference to him making that bogus statement. So when Elijah Cummings, your representative who's in Congress, who claimed to be that he marched with King as his claim to fame, although that Negro still hadn't done anything to get the damn trash up off the streets of Baltimore. If anybody should have been volunteering to go clean the streets up, he should have been the first one down there to do it. But that's another story. When folks are allowed to revise history and no one corrects them, then the miseducation of the Negro is still happening. And there is no one who wants to, even within the frat. Yeah, my chapter, Theta Phi chapter, there's not to embarrass him because he's some really talented, smart black men. But I had to get into a war of words with a couple of my frat brothers and chapter brothers at that, just a couple of weeks ago, who wanted to make it seem like it was unfair that the Ocasio +3 were being criticized. I mean, especially the one from Somalia. Okay, she may be cute. I give her that. But her politics and the things that she proposed are just outrageous. They're not going to approve anything for black people. And in fact, as far as I'm concerned, she's part of the problem by being part of that party. You want to speak up, sister, about the condition of black people and how your party has contributed to that, then I'm all with you. Because hopefully that will motivate you and others to do something about it. But as long as you provide cover for them and make excuses for them, she wants us to be concerned about what's happening in Somalia, what's happening between Israel and the Palestinians. And although our people, black people right here in America, are catching hell, we can't even provide decent schools for our kids. Now, I'm not going to blame white Democrats for that. I'm not even going to blame the Democratic Party. You know whose sorry asses should be blamed for the lack of education in our school, in our areas? Black people who allow this to happen. Regardless what your motivation is, we still sit back and allow this to happen. We know the schools are terrible. We know our kids are not being educated properly. We need to go back, turn the clock back to the time when our kids were educated properly and what was going on at that time and then reproduce it. Back then, we paddled kids. We set high expectations. There was no math for dummies at Paul Dunbar High School in D.C. These kids were learning calculus by the time they came out of high school. They had learned 2 foreign languages when they came out of high school. Where is that today? No, we've watered down the curriculum and made it so easy. And even with that, our kids still don't half our boys don't graduate. They decide to drop out, go do whatever, rather than sit here in school. Tom, the 40 acres are just one small piece of what that party is, the damage that party has done. So we can't cover for them anymore. We can't make excuses for them anymore. We have to put the spotlight on their ads because the starting point for your solution is education. But education will not get fixed under this current condition unless you call these people out because they're the ones who run it. So they have no incentive unless you embarrass them to change it. Right now, it's doing their will.
Jimmy, I agree with you in a lot of your points. I don't know that embarrassing the Democratic Party is really going to change the behavior of the black community. And I think where we need to focus is not, whether we call out Democrats or not. I don't know that that's going to be effective or going to motivate the black community to change its behavior in several different areas. Jimmy, I think first of all, say what now?
What do you think will change it? What will change it then? Give me your solution.
Well, you know what? There are a couple of things that when we start talking about efficacy, we have to look at it at an institutional level. I mean, and I'm talking about some things that are tactical, and I'm talking about some things that are strategic. Number one is we have to hold each other responsible for the results that we're not getting, because yeah, some of it may come from the party, some of it may come from your federal government and or your local government. But the reality of it is the answers are not going to come from the same folks who are putting you in the position where you are right now. I mean, unless you start with self, unless you start looking in the mirror individually and collectively, you are not going to make any change. What that means is that for each of us individually and collectively, we are going to have to make better decisions. What does that look like? Number one, for our families and our communities, we're going to have to turn the damn TV off, and especially for our young people, and spend more time in the damn books and in the library. And if that library looks like a laptop computer or a phone, we're going to have to get back into the books for self-education in order for our self-preservation. That's number one, because the reality of it is, if we are ignorant, we are bound to be following anybody else, because obviously we are living with the collective inferiority complex. Number two, it comes down to economics. The reality of it is, if we're giving 99% of our money collectively to some other group of people who is not reinvesting in our community, then they have no incentive, just like any political party does not have any incentive to do anything else for you if you're not doing anything for ourselves. And so the reality of it is, yes, we have got to take responsibility, look in the mirror, and hold ourselves responsible for what we are not doing for ourselves, holding ourselves responsible and turning our economics inwards, because nobody, Jimmy, is going to help us before we help ourselves. And unfortunately,
I agree with you 100% on that one. That is true.
And so, again, we can blame anybody that we want to, Jimmy, but if we are not going to own our responsibility for getting these problems solved, no one else is going to help us, because we have no leverage to do anything about it economically or politically.
One follow-up question, Tom. How do we hold ourselves responsible when the message out there is not your fault?
Well, Jimmy, there is a small group of folks, and I'll say it, small group of folks who understand our history enough to know that our condition is not completely our responsibility, but our future is. We cannot count on the folks who were responsible or who had an influence as to us being at the very bottom of the economic pie in America to all of a sudden feel sorry or feel ashamed and take responsibility for helping us close the gap in finding some parity in this country. We have to say, you know what? The last 500 years have been the last 500 years, but we can't count on the same folks who are responsible for helping put us in this position to get us out of it. We have to take responsibility for that. And if we have to fight our way out, if we have to go someplace else to do it, that's what we're going to do. Because the folks who have wealth and power, they're not going to give that up. That is not the law of preservation of any animal, including the human animal.
Well, Tom, I wish that your view of the world would actually, that those events would unfold to allow us to do that. History has shown that that's not going to happen, unfortunately. The people, like you said, who have the power and the wealth now have no incentive whatsoever to change it, and those who even have a desire to change it. Now, like, for instance, I firmly believe that former President Obama went to office with well-intentioned to hopefully do some things to help Black people. I think the reality of it is that once he was exposed to who the true power brokers are, who really pulls the strings of the puppet, that he had to go along with so much stuff that did not benefit Black people. Benefited women, gave them free health care, reproductive care, supposedly birth control pills. You benefited the unions with card check. You benefited other groups, but somehow when it came to Blacks, well, I can't be the Black president. I can't do anything for Black people and be perceived as the Black president. But Negro, you could be perceived as the gay and lesbian president. You can be perceived as the president for women and for unions, but the people who put you in office, who supported you, you can't do anything for them. In fact, you're taking money away from the Black schools. That makes it now more difficult for some Black kid to get an education. How is that productive? Just leave the Black schools alone. You don't have to do anything to them. Just leave it as is. Just don't make it any worse. But I think that these were the conditions to test your fealty and your loyalty to that damn party. So how in the world is the black man ever going to overcome all these conditions when the economic conditions are not in our favor, the psychological damage that's done to our women and to our young kids and to our men to keep us from coming together and forming relationships and strong families, the thug gangster behavior that used to be encouraged by the newspapers by publishing the jail reports to make it seem like blacks were thugs and gangsters, to now programming enough programming that's in place socially where our kids want to be gangsters and thugs and bitches and hoes proudly. Tom, how in the world do we overcome all of this psychological impact? It's not possible. So black people who come in from other places who hadn't been subject to this for generation after generation after generation, all they see is opportunity. Black folks who are here, all we see is misery. And somehow we made misery the new norm because we're just willing to live with it. We don't even know we had really great high schools back before 1960. We don't even know we had cities that were economically where black folks were wealthy, in charge, and doing things, providing jobs for other black people. We don't even know this. A handful of us knowing it is not answering is not a solution. Because even on that handful, they help contribute to the whole process of the brainwashing and keeping other black people down. It just happened that they've been able to escape. So I'm asking you, man, with the enormity of what we face, how in the hell is black folks ever going to get out unless you start rebelling, letting people know that I know what you're doing, I'm not going to take it anymore, I'm not going to support you anymore. So if that means I don't vote, I don't vote. You're not going to embarrass me into, well, all that's been done is for you to vote, and then expect me to vote for you, and you're the one fighting against me voting, and my people vote historically. So, man, so a revolution is needed. We will have to fight for this. You're not going to get out from under it easily. So I agree with you there. But how many people are willing to fight to be free?
All we need, Jimmy, is a few of the right people at the end of the day. Because I mean, if we look at what has really happened historically in this country, every revolution that we've had in this country, whether we're talking about the revolution that created this country or the revolutions that we've had internally within this country, clearly everybody was not on board. But you know what? If you have a small group of passionate people, the right people who are committed to a cause, the reality of it is, when we look at history revisits what happens 20, 30 years early. And the reality of it is, there are some folks, we talk about I forgot, I think it was maybe the 50th or some odd, 50th or some odd anniversary of John Carlos, and I forget the other brother's name right now, who were in the Olympics in the mid 60s. And where those brothers were demonized during that period of time for raising their fist and fighting for what was right in America, while America saw them as being, for lack of a better term, traitors. They look at them 50 plus some odd years later as heroes when at that time they were demonized. And so again, it takes a few conscious, passionate people to do the right thing. And it may not be popular, it may not be comfortable at the time, but eventually we have to have faith in the human spirit. I don't know about having faith in America doing what's right, but in the human spirit that eventually a few folks who are doing what's right will eventually show the folks, even if it's a few decades later, that you know what, it's time to get on board. Because at the end of the day, you know, we may be black, we may be Hispanic, we may be white, we may be Indian, we may be Asian, but at the end of the day, if we're here, we're all Americans, and we need to start acting like that.
So, Tom, let me ask you this: why did Jesse Jackson ever get the nomination for the Democratic Party to be president?
The why part of that. Part of it is context in the time of where he was.
Let's look at let's compare and contrast him and the black man, supposedly black man, half white, half black, who did get it. This was Jesse's second attempt, and leading in the polls, leading in the delegate count. What happened to sabotage his desire? And then you look at Barack Hussein Obama, former president, who made a point not to do anything for black people because he did not want to be labeled the black president. He wanted to be everybody's president, although he didn't go out and use his political capital for everybody. Jesse Jackson made the speech, gave the statement that black people have trillions of dollars in these 401ks down in Wall Street. And some of that money that's controlled by white people, it's not controlled by black people, but black people contributed to Wall Street. That black people should be able to pull some of the money out, some of the trillions of dollars they have stuck down there in 401ks, IRAs, and other investments down in Wall Street to rebuild their communities. Not sitting here beholden to the government. And so at that point, a ultra right-wing conservative such as myself could buy into Jesse's plan. Jesse, you know what? For the first time in a very long time, you have given me a reason to be optimistic and potentially vote for a damn Democrat. What happened to Jesse, Tom?
Are we talking about recently?
No. What happened back then? What happened to his presidential run? Why wasn't he the first?
Jimmy, I hate to say this, but
the person who had a positive solution that encouraging black people to help themselves, to take the money that you already have at your disposal. Don't sit there and wait for the federal government. You take some of your money and you rebuild your neighborhoods, you rebuild your economy, you rebuild your schools. What happened to him, Tom?
Well, Jimmy, at that point in time, Jesse may have had a significant portion of the black vote, but clearly he was not going to have a significant portion of the general vote.
He had the white vote going up until that point. He was leading in the delegate count. He was the front runner at that point.
But
Even
Jimmy,
he proposed the balloting had already started. He was the front runner, delegate-wise, at that point. It was looking as though he was going to become the nominee. What happened to him, Tom?
Jimmy, that just wasn't going to happen, Jimmy.
You don't want to blame them, but what happened to him, Tom? This had nothing to do with Republicans. What happened to Jesse? How did Obama make it? Oh, Obama never promised a solution or provided a solution for black people to do anything. Obama made it clear that I'm going to be status quo, that even when he got in office and tested to kill the DC voucher program as the first official act of his presidency, he did it. Those black kids in DC didn't do anything to Obama. You had parents sitting around talking about, why, Obama, why did you do this? The HBCUs did nothing to Obama other than support him. He took money away from him, not because he wanted to, but I'm pretty sure it was just a test to see just if the nigga was going to walk and step or not. And he decided that he was going to play along. It was more important to him to protect the party and be the president than do what's right for black people.
Why don't we do this? Because we are well in an hour. We need to ask that needs to be a completely different, separate conversation.
You know what?
We are right in an hour, brother. We are right in an hour.
You propose different topics, and let me tell you what the answer is going to always be, Tom. No matter where you look, no matter where you try to hide, the answer to all of our problems is going to trace back to the stinkiness that we have to overcome from that damn party. I don't care where you look.
You can call them, Jimmy, you can call them skanky. They can actually be skanky, but that's not going to solve our problem. Whether we acknowledge and they acknowledge that they're skanky or not, that is not going to solve our problem in our community. Even if they say, you know what, we are skanky and we have done y'all a disservice, that's not going to solve our problem, even if we acknowledge.
If you're in a hole and you have a shovel and you keep digging, what's the advice for that person in the hole?
But Jimmy, this is the problem. If they are skanky and they are skanky, 95% of black folks are still committed to that part. And so the question, but Jimmy, I don't believe the solution is saying your party. It's just like saying somebody's baby is ugly. At the end of the day, that's not going to get them to change their behavior. We need to focus on the vectors that are going to get our folks to change their behavior. And calling their baby ugly is not going to get them to change their behavior. Get us to change our behavior.
That's what you're saying. That
What's
somehow
that?
we able to overcome all these conditions and change our behavior while we continue to support the party.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm considering a different strategy. A different strategy. Saying your baby's ugly is not going to get Big Mama to change her from loving her baby. We have to look at a different strategy.
Well, if the problem is producing ugly babies, maybe the answer is to stop producing ugly babies.
But
all
it's still
babies, I take that back. All babies are cute. Now, I don't want anybody emailing me saying that I'm attacking babies.
That is not a literal statement, Jimmy. All I'm just saying is telling Big Mama her baby's ugly is not going to prevent Big Mama from loving her baby. We've got to come up with a different strategy to affect a change in behavior. All
right, T. Well, you tell me what how we're going to get to that point under all this pressure that we're under. All I'm suggesting is having a political reckoning conversation. I don't know if that is going to motivate people to all of a sudden abandon a party that you feel is the greatest enemy of Black folks making progress in this country. I just don't know that that's going to be the answer to that question or the solution to that problem. I'm sorry. I understand. And so the Bible has warned us against the great deceiver, and no one has deceived us more than that skank party. In addition to that, and even if you don't take the religious reference out of it, go take a look at Star Wars. Star Wars, you had a Sith Lord who was controlling the Sith, in control of the Separatists, and in control of the Empire. All three entities fighting against each other, and one person deceiving everybody as to what his identity is and who he was, and that he was pulling the strings. You know, it took 3 or 4 movies for folks to finally figure out the whole plot of this, that you had one person driving the whole process, and that's exactly where we are today, Tom. A small group of people, if you don't want to identify the party, fine. Small group of people who will put this system in place, who benefit from this system, and have somehow convinced you that they're your friend, and then for you to continue to support them. And just like Palpatine, the Emperor, the Sith Lord, and the Separatists, all one person, all pull the strings of everybody, even control the Jedi Order, because he would give them assignments and stuff to go do, and they didn't even know that they were working for a Sith Lord. So if you don't believe the Bible telling you that the great deceiver is going to destroy your life and your life is destroyed, but somehow you can't figure out who the great deceiver is, go watch the movie Star Wars. That's all I got to say. We out.
All right.
So until next week, this is Black Men Speak with your co-host J.R. Stewart.
And your co-host Tommy Duncan.
Last word and close us out.
All right. Y'all have a good evening or a good day.
So